What role did the Australian 9th Division play at the end of the beginning? We look at the conduct of the Second Battle of El Alamein. Ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to be looking at the Second Battle of El Alamein. We're going to be looking at a couple of components of that. Firstly, we'll be looking at the first two phases of the operation. We're going to be looking at Operation Lightfoot, which is the break-in and the dogfight that sees the crumbling of the German defences. We're not going to be looking at Operation Supercharge. That is the breakout, where Montgomery exploits the culmination of the German defences. We're going to look at the battle through a couple of lenses. Primarily, we're going to be looking at the command decisions taken at an army level by Montgomery. We'll also be looking at the conduct of the 9th Australian Division. The magnificent 9th, at this stage of the war, already wearing with pride the nickname the Rats of Tobruk. Their exploits today have largely been forgotten, and I think that's a bit of a tragedy. They are one of the best, if not the best, divisions that the Australian Army has ever produced. A lot of their success was due to their commander, from 1941 to 43, Lieutenant General Leslie Morshead, or, as the men knew him, Ming the Merciless. He was a battalion commander in the First World War. He served in the militia in the interwar period, and he was given command of the 9th Division on the 29th of January 1941. In the official history of the Second World War, he is described as such. Morshead was every inch a general. His slight build and seemingly mild facial expression masked a strong personality, the impact of which, even on a slight acquaintance, was quickly felt. The precise, incisive speech and flint-like, piercing scrutiny acutely conveyed impressions of authority, resoluteness, and ruthlessness. If battles, as Montgomery was later to declare, were contests of wills, Morshead was not likely to be found wanting. A couple of interesting quotes from Morshead to give you a little bit of an insight into his thinking. Now, these are from his time during the Siege of Tobruk. When he saw some British propaganda talking about how Tobruk, they can take it, he said, "We're not here to take it, we're here to give it." Not only was he staunch in the defence, so he instructed his officers at Tobruk that there will be no Dunkirk here, there is to be no surrender and no retreat. But also he looked for every opportunity to seize the offensive. I determined that we should make no man's land our land. After 2nd El Alamein, the 9th Division would eventually return to Australia, where they would train in the Atherton Tablelands for fighting in New Guinea. And one of the roles that they played in the New Guinea battles, which has largely been forgotten today, was the landing at Lae. They conducted a divisional amphibious landing 27 kilometres east of Lae. Between them lay 4 rivers, including the Busu River, which is one of the 10th fastest flowing rivers in the world. It took them just 12 days to cross those 4 rivers, cover the 27 kilometres, and get into the town of Lae. They were just beaten there by 7th Division, which had taken the overland route. The fall of Lae was ahead of schedule, and in order to exploit the advantage that they had over the Japanese, 9th Division was tasked to conduct a brigade amphibious assault at Finschhafen. Just 6 days later, they landed troops at Scarlet Beach. Conducting a successful amphibious assault with just 6 days' notice is an incredible feat of arms. Highlights the training, experience, morale, and capabilities of an elite division. But we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, because rather than the glorious paradise beaches of Finschhafen, we are in the desert in Egypt, looking at across the way at the Devil's Garden that Rommel has constructed for the 8th Army. From Rommel's point of view, his problems are all of a logistics nature, and these supply problems are of his own making. OKW had looked at attacking Malta. Rommel realised that this was an important operation, but he thought that his operation, the seizing of the Suez Canal, would be more important than attacking Malta. His desire to seize the canal, and possibly the glory, reinforced Hitler's concerns. He was hesitant to commit paratroops again after the shocking losses that they had suffered at Crete. And we'll be looking at Crete a little bit later as we look at the role of anti-aircraft artillery and how that impacted the outcome in that battle. Rommel was forced to fight the Second Battle of El Alamein because he couldn't withdraw further because he had insufficient trucks and fuel to move his Italian infantry. A quick appreciation of the timeline. Montgomery becomes commander of the 8th Army on the 15th of August. The Battle of Alamein is concluded on the 5th of September. Montgomery has 7 weeks between the end of Alamein and the commencement of Second El Alamein. Montgomery will use the 7 weeks that he's got to refine the plan that Auchinleck had created for the attack at Second El Alamein. He will make some important changes to it. There will also be relentless training for the upcoming battle. 22nd of September sees Rommel leave for sick leave. He goes back to Germany. And he will remain there until the commencement of the battle, where he is called back to duty. He's receiving treatment for a significant stomach ailment. But before he leaves, he sets the defensive plan, and he also ensures the construction of the Devil's Garden. Now, I've done a little bit of research into the Devil's Garden. It's difficult to know exactly how many mines and booby traps were placed in there, potentially in the millions. He creates 2 barriers running north-south. The eastern minefield, which is the one facing the British, has outposts within it. A combination of anti-tank and anti-personnel mines to make clearing the area that much more difficult. There's many booby traps in there as well, with anti-lift devices. The western field is the main defensive position, and there's a 3-kilometre gap between each of the minefields. He layers his German infantry battalions in between Italian ones with the intent to stiffen Italian resolve, which is a little bit unfair because some of the Italian divisions had actually fought quite well in the battles leading up to Second El Alamein. One important thing to remember about that minefield is that it is still in place today and it is still causing casualties. A very large amount of unexploded ordnance, mortars, artillery rounds, as well as all of the mines that were laid in that area. At Second El Alamein, we see the old empire coming back together. From north to south, we've got the 30th Corps, which is under Lieutenant General Oliver Lees. So we've got the 9th Australian, 51st Highland, 2nd New Zealand, 1st South African, 4th Indian Infantry. And the Corps Reserve is the 23rd Armoured Brigade with 186 Valentine tanks. This is the main effort of Operation Lightfoot. And it's called Operation Lightfoot because that is the way that Montgomery sees them traversing the minefields that they've got in front of them, lightly. They are supported by 10th Corps. This is Monty's Corps de Chasse, the hunting corps, the armoured fist that is going to support the infantry as they fight through the German positions. Commanded by Lieutenant General Lumsden. Under them are 1st and 10th Armoured Divisions under Major Generals Briggs and Gatehouse, respectively. There's also elements of the 8th Armoured Division in there as well. To the south, we've got the 13th Corps under Lieutenant General Brian Horrocks. 50th Northumbrian, 44th Home Counties, that's a Territorial Army Division, and 7th Armoured. The Desert Air Force has got 500 aircraft versus 350 for the Luftwaffe. They are really starting to be able to generate air superiority when they require it. And critically, they've built up an almost unlimited amount of ammunition and supplies. This is a significant difference to that which what Rommel has. He's always going to be short of almost everything that he needs, to the point where it will fundamentally inhibit his ability to manoeuvre. So when you look at the manoeuvre of the Panzer Army Africa, you have to remember the fuel constraints placed on Rommel because that overshadows all of the decisions that he makes. So Rommel in the Panzer Army Africa has got the 90th Light Africa Division. He's also got the Deutsche Afrika Corps under Lieutenant General Wilhelm Ritter von Thoma, 15th Panzer, 21st Panzer, And he's also got the Italians under Marshal Ettore Bastico, and they've got the 10th, 20th and 21st Corps. The Axis in total comprise about 180,000 troops, less of half of which are German. The 8th Army numbers 220,000. Critically, Montgomery has access to the ultra-signal decrypts, and so he knows that both the German High Command in Berlin and Rommel's headquarters is very confident that they're going to be able to defeat the 8th Army. They understand the German scheme of manoeuvre for the conduct of the defensive battle. Remember that there is a significant Allied deception plan at the tactical, operational and strategic level that is going on. So if you're not tracking that, definitely have a listen to the 2 podcasts that we did that look at exactly the work that was done to ensure that Rommel was quite certain that the main attack would come in the south, when in reality, Monty was going to strike in the north. The full moon occurred on the 24th of October, so that was the earliest that the attack could be scheduled for. Monty was going to need all the illumination he could get because many of the mines were going to be cleared by hand. An important job for the sappers, and anything to make their job easier was going to be critical in the success of the initial 24 hours. Monty's original plan was to punch 2 holes in the defences. Both of these were going to be done by 30th Corps. Attacks by 13th Corps would act as a delay. His intent was to then punch the armoured of 10th Corps through and then defeat Rommel's armour piecemeal as it was fed into the battle. His intent was to destroy the armour first and then allow the mopping up of the infantry. The orders that he issued on the 6th of October were significantly different to this. It saw the destruction of the infantry first. Monty believed that the original plan was too ambitious given the level of training within 10th Corps. This was why he had 10th Corps act as static pillboxes at the Battle of Alamein, and what he had seen at Alamein reinforced the idea that the training and the capabilities of 10th Corps were not up to the requirements of his original plan. Monty, in his book 8th Army, Alamein to the River Sangro, describes the changes that he made. It is generally accepted that the plan in modern battle should aim first at destroying the enemy's armour, and that once this has been accomplished, the unarmoured portion of his army can be dealt with readily. I decided to reverse this concept and destroy first the unarmoured formations. While doing this, I would hold off the armoured divisions, which would be tackled subsequently. In broad terms, the fighting elements of Rommel's army comprised holding troops, mostly unarmoured, who manned defences and guarded essential areas of ground, and mobile troops, mostly armoured, whose role was offensive. The mobile troops would be used to deliver counterattacks during defensive periods and to form the spearhead of advance in the offensive. If holding troops could be destroyed, the enemy would be unable to secure ground vital to the action of his armoured forces. These would be denied firm bases from which to manoeuvre and within which to refurbish, and their supply routes would lie open to interruption. In these circumstances, the armoured formation would be forced to withdraw or perish. My idea, therefore, was to aim first at the methodical destruction of the infantry divisions holding the enemy defensive system. This would be accomplished by means of a crumbling process, carefully organised from a series of firm bases, an operation within the capabilities of my troops. For success, the method depended on holding off the enemy's armour while the crumbling manoeuvre was carried out. It was also vital that the break-in battle, designed to gain a foothold in the enemy's defences, should achieve complete success, so that the enemy infantry might be attacked from the flank and rear and its supply routes in the forward area could be cut. The enemy's armour would obviously not sit still and watch the gradual destruction of the infantry. It would be launched into counterattacks. If I could position my armour beyond the area of the crumbling operations, on ground of its own choosing, the enemy tanks would have to attack in conditions favourable to us and could be held off. The minefields, particularly those west of the main Axis positions, would restrict the approaches available to the enemy tanks, which might try to counterattack our assaulting units while we were dealing with the defending infantry. If the approaches themselves were closed down by our tanks in position, we would be able to proceed relentlessly with our plans. My orders for the battle, issued on the 6th of October, provided for 3 simultaneous attacks. The main thrust by 30th Corps in the north was to be made on the front of 4 divisions, with the task of forcing 2 corridors through the enemy's minefields. 10th Corps was to pass through these corridors. In the south, 13th Corps was to mount 2 operations, one in the area east of Gab el-Kalak and Karat el-Kadim, the other further south directed on Hainamat and the Takar feature. 13th and 30th Corps, having broken into the enemy's defences, were to undertake methodical destruction of the troops holding the forward positions. 10th Corps had the ultimate task of the destruction of the enemy armour, and it was to be manoeuvred so as to prevent enemy interference with 30th Corps operations. It would assist, as opportunity offered, in the crumbling process. The role of 13th Corps was primarily to mislead the enemy into believing that our main thrust was to be delivered in the south, and to contain enemy forces there, particularly 21st Panzer Division. 7th Armoured Division was available for the operation, but I ordered that it was to be kept intact on the southern flank in order to preserve balanced dispositions throughout the front. Whereas everything was to be ready to pass this formation through the minefields and to exploit it in a swing northwards towards Darba, I made it clear that the attack was not to be pressed if heavy casualties were likely to result. My orders emphasised that it was vital to retain the initiative and to keep sustained pressure on the enemy. The troops were to take advantage of any weakening and were to avoid any long pauses which might give the enemy time to recover his balance. The break-in operation was to be facilitated by a very heavy counter-battery plan, the effect of which was to be strengthened by switching the whole of the bomber effort onto the artillery areas as soon as the battle began. I realised that following the break-in, a real dogfight would ensue. I was confident that our resources were sufficient to withstand the strain that this would impose. The essentials of battle would be the retention of the initiative, the maintenance of pressure on the enemy, and the preservation of balance, so that it would be unnecessary to react to the enemy's thrusts. The Royal Air Force plan of operations began with the winning of the air battle before the attack opened. Having obtained ascendancy over the German Air Force, the whole of the air effort was to be available to cooperate intimately in the land battle. The 3 areas that Monty had been working on were leadership, material and training. The stores had been built up, the new tanks, the new 6-pounder guns had all been brought into the area of operations. The troops had been trained up not only with the operation of their new weapons, but in combined arms fighting. He was going to have the 8th Army fighting as an army, not piecemeal and in jock columns as had been happened previously. And from a leadership point of view, Monty went around to each of the units and was speaking down to the lieutenant colonel level to make sure that everyone understood their role in the forthcoming battle. On the 23rd of October, Montgomery issued a personal message from the army commander, and this was to be read to all of the troops. When I assumed command of the 8th Army, I said that the mandate was to destroy Rommel and his army, and that it would be done as soon as we were ready. We are now ready. The battle which is now about to begin will be one of the decisive battles of history. It will be the turning point of the war. The eyes of the whole world will be on us, watching anxiously which way the battle will swing. We can give them their answer at once. It will swing our way. We have first-class equipment, good tanks, good anti-tank guns, plenty of artillery and plenty of ammunition, and we are backed by the finest air-striking force in the world. All that is necessary is that each of us, every officer and man, should enter the battle with the determination to see it through, to fight and to kill, and finally to win. If we all do this, there can be only one result. Together we will hit the enemy for 6, right out of North Africa. The sooner we win this battle, which will be the turning point of the war, the sooner we shall all get home to our families. Therefore, let every officer and man enter the battle with a stout heart and the determination to do his duty so long as he has breath in his body. And let no man surrender so long as he is unwounded and can fight. Let us pray that the Lord Mighty in battle will give us this victory. Bernard Law, Montgomery. The role given to the 9th Australian Division was initially a secondary role. They were the northernmost division, but they would be securing the flank of the 51st Division, and it was their job to punch the hole through for the northern corridor, which 1st Armoured would pass through. The southern corridor would be the responsibility of the New Zealand 2nd Division, supported with 9th Armoured Brigade, and they would have 10th Armoured Division punching through that southern corridor. 9th Division was to advance on a 3-kilometre frontage to a depth of 9 kilometres, with the Red Line, which was their Phase 1 objective, beyond the enemy's forward defences 5 kilometres from the start line. The 26th Brigade would occupy the right flank with the 20th Brigade on the left. So it was the 20th Brigade that would be have the divisional boundary with the 51st Division to its south. 24th Brigade was in reserve, and that was to hold the northernmost coastal sector, conducting a diversionary attack and mine the northernmost flanks towards Trig 24 westwards during the initial attack. The ground that the brigades would cover was well known to the Australian troops. It was an area of the forward defences lines that consisted of undulating, hard, stony, gradually rising desert, broken by occasional swells and low ridges. The only vegetation consisted of low, scrubby, prickly bushes, commonly known as camel thorn. The area was under observation from the Sidi Abd al-Rahman Mosque. On the night of the commencement of the battle, Morshead reflected in his diary, "It is now 8:40 p.m. and in exactly 2 hours' time, by far the greatest battle ever fought in the Middle East will be launched. I have settled down in my hole in the ground, a little more than 2,000 yards from our start line. A hard fight is expected, and it will no doubt last a long time. We have no delusions about that. It is a supreme effort to finish the war in North Africa, and if successful, as I think it should be, it should have a very material influence on the war." The men are full of determination and confidence. These grand fellows have never failed to respond fully. At 9:40, every gun we have opens on the enemy guns. My CPH, the Corps Photographic Liaison Officer, has just called to say that today's air photographs reveal that he, the enemy, has moved 3 batteries to positions previously empty. This is the usual procedure. Had he anticipated tonight's the night, he would have moved nearly all his guns. So that information is encouraging. Operation Lightfoot commenced on the 23rd of October 1942 at 21:40 with a 15-minute pre-HL bombardment. This was a counter-batteries fire that lasted for 5 minutes. The attack got underway at 2200 and made good progress through the eastern minefield, but slowed in the western minefield as its devil gardens of mines and booby traps created casualties. The mines needed to be cleared the old-fashioned way, prodding with a bayonet or wire. The infantry fell behind schedule, coming up 1,000 to 2,000 metres short of Line Oxlick, which was their morning objective. Lumsden's 10th Corps struggled as well. The Germans also had issues of their own. They had significantly C2 issues. Rommel was still in Germany for medical treatment as a result of the deception plan, which aimed at creating the impression that the attack would come later in the month. His replacement, General George Stumm, had high blood pressure, and when his car was strafed on a trip to the front, he died. His body was discovered the next day with no wounds. Now, Stumm was an interesting character, and 5 months previously to this, he'd been court-martialed for disobeying one of Hitler's standing orders around using aircraft to deliver orders. A Feisler Storch had become lost on the Eastern Front with the plans for Case Blue and had been captured by the Soviets. He was found guilty, and only the intervention of the head of OKW, Keitel, saved him from 5 years' prison. Stumm's body was discovered on a track by the Allies. He'd been conducting a reconnaissance and had believed to have suffered a heart attack after the vehicle had come under fire. He was to be replaced by General Ritter von Thoma. The progress overnight had been slowed down by the way that the mines had been laid out. They were in unpredictable arrays of dense mines and open spaces. Scorpion tanks, which had flails fitted to them, were meant to be able to clear the lanes, but many of them had broken down. 10th Corps, the Armoured Corps, had significant issues in moving their tanks forward through the lanes that had already been cleared. General Ritter von Thoma believed that the Allied attacks could be contained. He had correctly assessed that they wouldn't be able to clear the minefields in one night. The situation for Montgomery was exacerbated by the lack of aggression in punching through those lanes by 10th Corps. On the 24th, D+1, the Desert Air Force conducts over 1,000 sorties in support of the offensive. At dusk, 15th Panzer and the Italian 133rd Armoured Division, Littorio, attacked from the Kidney Feature. They engaged 1st Armoured, and in total over 100 tanks were involved, half of which were destroyed at the end of the battle. Montgomery issued orders for the continuation of the offensive overnight. However, a British convoy of 25 vehicles carrying petrol and ammunition had been attacked by the Luftwaffe and set on fire. Lumsden wanted to call off the attack by 10th Armoured, but he was overruled by Montgomery, and so they attacked from Materia Ridge. That attack failed. The progress had initially been good, but during the night, de Guingand, who was Monty's chief of staff, became sufficiently disturbed by reports that the attack was bogging down that he thought it appropriate to wake Montgomery. This was one of the few times in his career that he was required to wake Montgomery up. He called together the Corps commanders and the divisional commanders from 10th Corps, and Montgomery listened to their progress reports. At the end of that, he issued them orders to clear the minefield and to recommence the assault. If they couldn't, he would find people who could. John Coates believes that this was the psychological turning point in the battle because it stiffened the resolve of the commanders, particularly Lumsden, commander of 10th Corps, and Briggs and Gatehouse, his armoured divisional commanders. I think it's important to stop here and just to reflect on that action that Montgomery has taken here. He has a plan. He understands that there's going to be casualties. Montgomery, more than many generals, understood that there would be casualties. Remember, he served on the Western Front in the First World War, so he's very in tune with the meaning of what casualties is going to entail. But a lot of the preparatory work has been done to set 8th Army up for success. He just feels that his Corps commander and his divisional commanders aren't sharing in his desire for victory. In the show notes, I'll include a link to a YouTube video where Thomas Ricks gives a presentation about why World War II generals were more successful than generals in Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan. And that was because he believes Div commanders and Corps commanders could have been relieved of their job. No one likes to be sacked. But for a commander, it remained a very useful tool to ensure that the commanders understood what their intent was and that they carried it out. And remember, Montgomery was a product of this system. He had his job because Auchinleck had been sacked by Churchill. And Montgomery was lucky in some respect. Many of the changes in 8th Army that he had benefited from had been put in place by Auchinleck. There's a very interesting interview with Auchinleck who talks about his dismissal. So I'll also include that in the show notes. It gives you an interesting perspective about how he may have been a little bit unfairly handled by Churchill. But remember, Churchill operating at the grand strategic level, he's got to be able to fight that political battle just as his army commanders need to be fighting the military battle. The Crumbling attacks began on the night of the 25th, 26th. This was meant to have been conducted by 9th Australian and 2nd New Zealand, but 2nd New Zealand was supporting Gatehouse's attempted breakthrough in Materia Ridge. So it was left to 9th Division for the Crumbling assault. Their objective was Point 29, a low-rising feature that dominated the nearby terrain. And during a night assault, the 2nd 48th Battalion seized that feature. Rommel had returned to Africa on the evening of the 25th, a significant morale boost to the Axis forces. He was very concerned because he found that the 8th Army was fighting in a way which he hadn't seen before. They were fighting as a concentrated and orchestrated force. The German counter-penetration forces had denied the Allies the breakthroughs in either of the corridors, but they had taken significant casualties from Allied artillery and airstrikes. Prior to the attack on Point 29, the 9th Division had captured a German regimental commander and a battalion commander, and they had confirmed that the area was free of mines. So that night, they rushed Point 29 in Bren gun carriers, and the attack was completely successful. Point 29 was key, if not decisive, terrain. Rommel probably put more emphasis on it than Montgomery did, but the degree to which he was prepared to fight to get it back would see the 9th Division thrown into the main focus of the Second Battle of El Alamein. From there, the Australians were able to threaten the coastal road. To the east of the point that the Australians now threatened on the coastal road was the German 164th Infantry Division, and Rommel was determined to see that they weren't cut off. Montgomery, meanwhile, is planning for Operation Supercharge. This is going to be the breakout. We've conducted the break-in. Traditionally, the next phase would be called the fight through, but Monty calls it the dogfight. The breakout will be the pursuit of the retreating Axis forces. Rommel orders counterattacks on the Australian 26th Brigade. These are unsuccessful, predominantly because they are supported by significant air and artillery support. Without success, Rommel is forced to push in the German 21st Panzer Division, the 90th Light Division, and the Italian Trieste Division into the attack. Montgomery, through Morshead and the 9th Division, is setting the conditions for a successful breakout with Op Supercharge. Here are 3 divisions that are going to take significant casualties in the intervening battles and that aren't going to be able to resist that breakout. This is why the work that 9th Division does is so important. The Germans attack again on the 27th, and it is beaten back with heavy losses in tanks. Morshead resumes the offensive, and he is intent on cutting off the coast road with further crumbling attacks. These crumbling attacks are supported with an increasing number of guns. As Montgomery sees the importance that Rommel is placing on the coast road, he reinforces the 9th Division to be able to draw in more of those troops and attrit them. And the way that he weights that effort is through air support and artillery. And here we see the flexibility of the artillery coming to the fore. Morshead assault is largely held by the 90th Light Division and the 161st German Infantry Division. However, it only heightens Rommel's concern about the coast road. Rommel starts to reconnoitre fallback positions around Fuka, but he decides on to make one more attempt. Rommel would later describe the situation as thus. He was going to make one more attempt by tenacity and by stubbornness of our defences to persuade the enemy to call off his attack. It was a slim hope, but the petrol situation alone made it a retreat which would inevitably lead to mobile warfare out of the question. So we're seeing here Rommel's freedom of action limited by his logistics position. Supercharge was to have commenced through the 9th Div position, but Monty altered this based on the heavy resistance from the Panzer Army Africa. He decided that he would use a heavily reinforced 2nd New Zealand Division. As a diversion, the 9th Division would once again attack north, cut the coast road and encircle the remaining German defenders on the night of the 30th, 31st. This diversion was successful. Rommel believed it to be the 8th Army's main effort, and he personally led the counterattack with the 21st Panzer and 90th Light Divisions. This would lead to the fighting in the Saucer, and that was to be some of the heaviest fighting that would be seen in the entire campaign. John Coates, in his book, describes this moment as Morshead's decision of high moral courage. The 26th Brigade has been in contact since the start of the battle. They've been in fierce contact. They are tired, they've taken significant casualties. They're fought out. And now they've got 21st Panzer and 90th Light divisions attacking them. Morshead orders the 24th Brigade to rip with the 26th Brigade. Now, what's a rip? It's a relief in place. The 24th is going to go to where the 26th is, and it's going to assume its terrain, and it's going to assume its mission. It's going to do all of this whilst the 26th Brigade is in contact, and it's going to do it at night. What could possibly go wrong? A lot. Troops could get lost. There could be friendly fire incidences. The troops moving in may be engaged by the enemy. That they may run into mines. This is a high-risk activity. But being victorious in war depends upon first preparing the conditions for victory and then seeking battle with the enemy. So that's a quote from a famous Chinese guy. This is what both Montgomery and Morshead had done. The level of training within 9th Division was already quite high. Montgomery ensured that there was time for mission-specific training to be conducted, and Morshead ensured that the training was of large enough scale and of large enough complexity to prepare the 9th Division for the tasks it was likely to conduct during the battle. Training started out at small unit level, worked its way up battalion, then to brigade level, and they were done during the day as walkthrough talkthroughs, then as live fire activities, then they were conducted at night. And this gave Morshead the confidence to be able to order the RIP. The RIP was successful, and it was critical because it meant that the next morning, when the 21st Panzer and 90th Light attacked, they met a fresh brigade. Their assault was repulsed. Rommel could see the inevitable and he prepared to withdraw, but he received a direct order from the Führer. That order was, in the situation in which you find yourself, there can be no other thought but to stand fast, yield not a yard of ground, and throw every gun and every man into the battle. As to your troops, you can show them no other road than to that of victory or death. Hitler, never a big believer in the tactical withdrawal, forbids it. Rommel, the ever-loyal lieutenant, attempts to comply with this, but the withdrawal is thrust upon him. He strips the Italian divisions of their motor transport in order to withdraw the German divisions. Operation Supercharge commences, but it is an operation that the 9th Division will not take place in. There is one blot on an otherwise excellent battle for the 8th Army, and that is the failure of the pursuit. The Australian official historian writes, some of the pursuing formations were delayed by real difficulties, some by imaginary ones, some by their own lack of impetus. None evinced the initiative and drive needed to seize the prize. For the 9th Division, this would be the end of the battle. Operation Supercharge saw the main effort switch to the Tel Elisa area. 9th Division continued patrolling until the 4th of November. During the Alamein campaign, the 9th Division had suffered 22% of the 8th Army casualties, 1,177 KIA, 3,629 wounded, and 795 captured, and 193 missing. Curtin had requested the return of the 9th Division to support the defence of Australia against the Japanese offensive. Montgomery's principal biographer wrote an interesting passage about this time. One of his first acts on the 4th of November, with victory assured, was to go straight to the headquarters of the 9th Australian Division and thank General Morshead, whose troops had done so much to redeem the failure of the British armour between the 25th of October and Operation Supercharge on the 2nd of November. The 9th Australian Division alone had sustained as many casualties at El Alamein as the entire forces of 10th Corps. That the infantry of this Commonwealth country, not directly threatened by Germany, should have been willing to lay down their lives in such an exemplary manner was to Bernard Montgomery the deepest proof that the Allies would go on to win the war. And indeed, Montgomery would write later when describing the 8th Army breakout in North Africa, "We could not have won the battle in 12 days without the magnificent 9th Australian Division." In fact, Montgomery would go on to write, "I do not know of any Allied division that could have done that." That is something that I think is incredibly high praise for the 9th Australian Division. Rommel earlier had recognised the nature of the soldiers within the 9th Division when he wrote, following Tobruk, "A batch of some 50 or 60 Australian prisoners were marched off close behind us. Immensely big and powerful men, who without question represented an elite formation of the British Empire, a fact that was also evident in battle." And indeed, Major General Freddie de Guingand, so Chief of Staff for Montgomery, and indeed he would be the Chief of Staff for the Allied Land Force headquarters in Europe 1944 for the D-Day landings. And on that morning he said, "My God, I wish we had the 9th Australian Division with us this morning." Lord Carver, or Field Marshal Michael Carver, who actually fought at the Battle of El Alamein in one of the armoured divisions, he would go on to be Chief of the Defence Staff. He wrote of the 9th Division, "Well postured for future activities and within support of artillery, although neither their first nor their second attack led to their intended result of a breakthrough on the coast, nor even to the capture of their own more limited objectives, they had a profounder effect on the battle than could reasonably have been expected. Rommel's reaction was immediate, and despite the sound of advice of his subordinates, he persisted in counterattacks in that area, which brought needless loss and left him much less capable of dealing with Supercharge. And indeed, Harold Alexander wrote, "They fought until flesh and blood could fight no longer. Then they went on fighting." So high praise from a range of senior officers. British and German officers, no less. From a lessons learnt point of view, what do we get out of the Second Battle of El Alamein? From the German point of view, we've already talked about the logistics issues, and they were the fundamental issue that Rommel faced here. So from a strategic level, all the way down to the tactical level, there had been a failure to appreciate the requirements for logistics and set the Axis forces up for success in that respect. How bad was the logistics situation? Well, apart from the fact that almost all of the Italians were abandoned and captured, the retrograde movement that Rommel was forced to conduct often saw one vehicle towing two others on the flat coast roads because the fuel level was so low. They never achieved the 400 tonnes of fuel that they were hoping to get each day. One day was 200 tonnes, another day only 2 tonnes. There was no ability to conduct an active withdrawal, seizing opportunities to strike at pursuers because the fuel needed to be hoarded. One minor thing, the mine gardens had been found to be less successful than the Germans had hoped because many of the mines had been detonated, either by artillery fire or during the bombing attacks. The next episode will look at how the artillery was structured in many of the attacks that we saw during Second El Alamein, but this is an interesting side effect of the way that the artillery planning was conducted. During the retrograde manoeuvre that the Germans were conducting, there was one piece of key terrain, and that was the Hellfire Pass. It was a choke point for them. However, the Desert Air Force was unable to interdict at that point because the Germans had identified it as key terrain and they had pre-prepared anti-aircraft positions to protect the troops as they were transiting the pass. The key lessons that we've discussed for the 8th Army come from the way that they fought. We're starting to see the centralisation of the army. The army is fighting as an army, not in jock columns. They're really looking to concentrate force. They're also looking to combined arms. That combined arms effect was absolutely critical in the way that Montgomery saw he would inflict his will upon Rommel. He had to do it in a little bit of an unorthodox way. He had to use artillery more than he would have ideally used because of the fact that he wasn't confident that the armour was going to be able to fulfil their role. And indeed, 10th Corps needed a little bit of encouragement to conduct their operations as Montgomery saw them being needed to be done. Training, mission-specific training. Time and effort was put into training the troops very aggressively so that they were able to conduct the roles that they were going to need to do during Operation Lightfoot and the subsequent Op Supercharge. This revolved particularly around clearing minefields. But a lot of work was also done in that combined arms effort. Combined arms just doesn't happen. You can't put armour, artillery and infantry together and expect it just to work. The worst example of that is what we saw at Bullecourt, the shambles, the tragedy that was. Montgomery, with his World War I experience, would have seen that. He would have seen the introduction into service of the tanks. He understood what they were capable of. He understood the way that they needed to be blended into the attack. And don't forget, he'd also seen what it was like to be on the other side of that with the work that he had done during 1940 and the retreat in the Battle of France. Morale, he worked really hard to change the morale of 8th Army. The victory at Alam Halfa, a significant morale boost. But he relied on his headquarters, and I think this is a really important lesson. His headquarters worked on developing his orders, and a huge amount of staff work is required to develop orders for an army scale attack. They did all of that work while he was out visiting divisional commanders, brigade commanders. He made sure that his orders were delivered down to the lieutenant colonel level, so COs of battalions. He wanted as many people to understand not only what their role was going to be, but the fact that victory was preordained. that was him working towards building the morale of 8th Army. The deception plan. Now, I don't actually know to what degree Montgomery would have worked on deception. His deception plan was inherited from Auchinleck. Quite lucky in that respect. A great amount of resources had been put towards a very well thought out deception plan at the tactical, operational, and even at the strategic level to ensure that Rommel was uncertain about when the attack was going to come. He thought it would be later. He wasn't even in Africa when it occurred, and where it was going to come. He thought it was going to come in the south. It actually came in the north. And the fact that the logistics played such an important role at the strategic level and in the operational level meant that the deception plan was that much more relevant because of the fact that Rommel, in moving his troops around, was using up very, very precious fuel. Lastly, I think we see the real skill in Montgomery, and I'm not sure to which degree it was because of the fact that he was new, but he gave Churchill the victory that he needed. He gave Churchill the confidence that he was going to be able to bring that victory about. Auchinleck, for whatever reason, wasn't able to deliver that. So, moving on to the aftermath. Well, El Alamein lasted from the 23rd of October through to the 11th of November. The torch landings in North Africa commenced on the 8th of November. Casablanca, Oran, Algiers. The rapid success of those landings saw the Germans and Italian troops invade Vichy, France. That saw the French Army d'Africa side with the Allies, and they became 19th Corps. As Monty pushed westwards towards Tunisia, the Allied First Army moved east from Algeria into Tunisia. The Germans won the Battle of the Kasserine Pass, and we see that that's the battle that's portrayed in the movie Patton. Harold Alexander arrives in Tunisia and he takes command of the 18th Army Group. So this is the 8th Army and the Allied 1st Army. 1st and 8th Armies attack in April, and on the 13th of May, they see the surrender of the Axis forces in Tunisia. 2nd El Alamein set the conditions for that operational pincer movement. How important was that battle? Well, the Axis suffered around 330,000 casualties, many of them prisoners of war. Strategically, reinforcing the Axis forces there was one of the worst decisions that Hitler would make, and it created a catastrophe for Germany. And this is why Churchill would quote, "Now is not the end. It is not even the beginning of the end, but it is perhaps the end of the beginning." After the war, he would write, "Before El Alamein, we never had a victory. After El Alamein, we never had a defeat." Now, that's not entirely true, but it does highlight the pivotal role that the battle that 2nd El Alamein had in the history of the Second World War. Just to reinforce the role that 9th Division played in this success, I'm going to finish up with a speech from the Commander-in-Chief, Middle East Forces, General Sir Harold Alexander. He reviewed the 9th Australian Division on the 22nd of December 1942, and these were the words that he had for the magnificent 9th as they were leaving the theatre.
The Commander-in-Chief will address the division.
These great days we are living in are a time for deeds rather than words. But when great deeds have been done, then there is no harm in speaking of them, and great deeds have been done. The Battle of El Alamein will make history, and you are in the proud position of having taken a major part in that great victory. Your reputation as fighters has always been famous, but I do not believe that you have ever fought with greater bravery or distinction than you did during that battle when you broke the German and Italian armies in the Western Desert. It is always a fine and a moving spectacle to see, as I do today, worthy men who have done their duty on the battlefield, assembled in their ranks on parade. And those ranks filled again with young recruits and fresh reinforcements who have come to take the place of your fallen comrades. In the flux and change of war, individuals will change, some will come, others will go. Formations will move from one theatre to another, and where you will be when the next battles are fought, I do not know. But wherever you may be, my thoughts will always go with you, and I shall follow your fortunes with interest and your successes with admiration. But there is one thought which I shall cherish above all others, and it is this. Under my command fought the 9th Australian Division.
The Principles of War podcast is brought to you by James Ealing. The show notes for the Principles of War podcast are available at www.theprinciplesofwar.com for maps, photos and other information that didn't make it into the podcast. Follow us on Facebook or tweet us at Surprise Podcast. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review on iTunes and tag a mate in on one of our episodes. All opinions expressed by individuals are those of those individuals and not of any organisation.